certainly we're seeing more and more people, even guys doing ultra endurance events. We're starting to see that people in the ultra world, if I go back to those guys, 10, 11, 12 hours, they're still in at over 100 grams an hour now. So I think it really is developing into, carbs are kind of king, and it's building up that tolerance and capacity to actually take them in.
Welcome to the Low Tide Boyz, a Swimrun podcast. I'm Chip.
And I'm Chris, and this is episode 254 of the show. The off-season is upon us, but that doesn't mean that we stop dropping fire episodes. Replete with knowledge bombs all over the place. So, case in point, joining us this week to chat about the latest and greatest in fueling and nutrition information is head of sports science, the new head of sports science, at our favorite place, Precision Fuel and Hydration, Dr. Sam Shepard. So no time like the present / off season to level up your fueling game. And this conversation is worth its weight in carbs.
Well done.
It's a lot of grams.
How many grams?
A lot.
Thousands of grams of carbs. And head of sports science has almost close to 200 published scientific studies. I was doing a little research. They don't hire slouches over there in Precision Fuel and Hydration, but always... I feel like, just when you feel like you got a handle on nutrition, you're like, yeah, I think I'm in a good place. I know my numbers. I know this. I learned like 10 things from this episode.
There's always more to learn.
Always so much to know.
Always more to learn. Certainly, we've shouted it from the mountaintops on our corner of the internet, just how much we've learned from the folks at Precision Fuel and Hydration have sort of leveled up our performance. And it's really been a game changer for us. And I think, we were kind of kidding, but not kidding. It's the off season, but now it's a perfect time to start really thinking about your nutrition plans for next year. How are you going to try to level up? Are you going to get, gut trained and all this stuff? There's so much in this episode for you to kind of noodle on and try and apply for whatever works for you. I know it's really great for Dr. Shepard to join us.
Yeah, it was great to have the good doctor in with us for sure. And when we recorded this, it was right around Kona, the tail end of the triathlon season as well. So there was some kind of hot topics, pun intended. Precision Fuel and Hydration have a new, what is it? It's not heat chamber. That sounds like more diabolical.
Sounds like a dungeon.
Heat training facility in their parking garage of their new headquarters. So and I really like how he broke it down and made it digestible for you from a nutrition standpoint on how to think about it, because I know I've been guilty of this earlier in my career, and even as recent as just a few years ago. The sort of nutrition's like an afterthought, like, oh shit, I got a race next week, like let me get some gels at the store and like I'll eat these and things should go smoothly, right?
I'm just thinking about
sorely mistaken.
I'm just thinking about puns to try to throw in here.
Edge in here.
There's so many.
That's what people come to us for. The good fueling puns.
But if your swimrun season's over, we definitely recommend for you, take the load off, cut down on the volume, give yourself a proper off season. We're trying to do that. Chipper's coming back from injury. He had his first actual run. You're back to running, which is great. Yeah. I love how you've just been, really smart about it.
Yeah, and I was just chatting with Coach Liz the other day there, and, she's like, if you said that you would have wanted to race, we probably could have made it happen, but, I think it is a good decision that, in the short term, take the hit and not do a Otelo Austin, which was a great time, and I had a lot of fun, and it was a good experience for me there, but come back in 2024, and now with some of the being able to apply some more fueling advice from our good friends at Precision Fuel and Hydration.
Yeah, and if you hear anything in this episode, you're like, you know what? These guys sound like pretty good blokes. I want to throw some quid at them. I'm trying. Low Tide 24. That's the code. Get 15% off your order, Precision Fuel and Hydration. This isn't sponsored content. It's going to sound like it's sponsored content, but they're great. We love them. They've been huge supporters of us, sweat testing us, wasting their valuable scientist times on us. To our benefit, certainly not to theirs. But this is a great conversation, and we really hope you enjoy it and get a lot of, good stuff out of it. And as Chipper would say, get your notepads out for this one.
Seriously, get your notepads out. you'll be taking copious notes for this one. But without further ado, let's wrap it up and kick it on over to our conversation with Dr. Sam Shepard, head of sports science at Precision Fuel and Hydration.
I really feel like we gelled in this conversation.
We do gel a lot, Chris.
And there was a lot of flow.
There was a lot of flowing, yeah. Our hair is flowing. If you want to keep electrolyte tabs on the Low Tide Boyz, head over. Ooh, that was a stretch. We can go to Instagram. Any other ones?
No. On with the show.
On to the show.
All right, so super stoked to welcome the head of sports science at Precision Fuel and Hydration, Dr. Sam Shepard. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me late on this Friday afternoon, although it's your morning. So yeah, but great to be here.
We're bookending Friday here.
Yeah, no worries at all. So first question for you is, how long have you been working at PFH, and how awesome it is to work there?
Yeah, not that long. So I think about nearly 4 months now. I actually started on the 1st of July. I was working in the academic world. So I worked at Liverpool John Moores University in the sports science department there. So teaching and lecturing. And so we were doing research while teaching for 12 years, in fact. Yeah. So straight from my PhD in Birmingham, I went to Liverpool, spent 12 years there, and sort of just fancied a new challenge, and saw this job advertised earlier in the year, and knew Andy. So I'd known of Precision from being sweat tested in, I think it was 2018, that Andy and maybe JP came to where I was living at the time in Cheshire, my local triathlon club, and they sweat tested us. So I kind of followed the journey of Precision a little bit from that point, seeing them grow from a hydration perspective. And then, of course, post-COVID, the kind of fueling side of the product line came in as well. So after several interviews, it became more and more obvious I really, really wanted this job, and thankfully managed to get it. Of course, it's meant moving from relative north of England down to the south. It's a little bit warmer down here, which is nice, and now living 10 minutes from the beach, which is lovely as well. So happy I've made the switch for sure.
Well, I think they're doing something right over there at Precision PFH, because every employee we talk to is just like, oh, this is the greatest job ever. You're combining sort of your love of sport, whether that be triathlon, swim run, and then, your really scientific academic background, and you get to do a little bit of both and really help serve triathlon and swim run and trail running, ultra running communities now. So it really does seem like something great you all have going on. And I know Andy Blow, who we've had on, I don't know, Chris, 3 or 4 times at this point, I think, something over 250 plus episodes. But yeah, he was really excited about the new headquarters. And I'm an avid subscriber to the PFH newsletter, but I would love to hear more about the new heat training, heat box area that you all have constructed. How did that come about? And what are some really interesting things that you all are looking to get into from the heat training perspective?
So that was probably one of the intriguing things for me as coming into Precision and making the move, was the opportunity to kind of get this lab, if we like, up and running. It sounds a lot more impressive than maybe it is. It is a box in the car park.
Good marketing then, at least.
But it's effective. So we've dropped this kind of lab into the car park, if you like. And as you called it, a box, a nice green box, but that's going to serve as our lab moving forward. So the primary use for that really is going to be trying to give people an opportunity for like heat acclimation experiences, but also if they're local enough or willing to stay around sort of Christchurch and the Dorset area, then they can go through a heat acclimation process as well. So anywhere from 5 to 10 sessions in the heat lab, we can typically get it up to about 42 degrees, and then humidity is around sort of 40 to 50%, depending on how sweaty people are as well in that. And yeah, we've had a few people go through that process already. So Ant, one of the employees here at Precision, he's actually out in Kona at the Ironman World Championships racing tomorrow, in fact.
Wow.
And he's gone through that process of heat acclimation. He was kind of a bit of a guinea pig, which was great. So he's actually done 10 sessions in there. The idea is that those sessions aren't particularly taxing, so you should be able to train outside of those sessions as well, where the quality type of sessions come. So you're generally speaking, you're just doing your easier sessions that are allowing you to adapt to the heat, basically, and the adaptations that come with that, the greater capacity to cool, an increase in blood plasma volume, things like that. And I should also say Billy Munger is part of he's a double amputee, and he's actually racing Kona as well, trying to break the world record for a double amputee racing at the World Championship. So he came through the lab as well in preparation for that, which was really cool as well. But yeah, so it's set up and running now. It's probably been sort of live, if we like, for the last couple of weeks. And so yeah, hopefully we will start to get some more people through in the new year as they build into various events as well.
Nice. And just for our US listeners, that's about 108 degrees Fahrenheit, 42 C, warm, I think is official. It's warm.
Right. Yes, I think that I'm sure Sam can co-sign that as a scientist, that is indeed warm. Sam, so I'm curious, since you've been a PFH, obviously, their model of just helping everyone, regardless whether you use the product or not, is just such a wonderful. I mean, it just makes you love the company and want to support them and try their products, but they're not really trying to you guys aren't really trying to evangelize anyone on using PFH products. But I'm curious, when you work with athletes, and especially in sort of heat acclimation, like how are you sort of introducing sort of carbs and, and fluids and making sure you're getting your electrolytes? Like, how does that work when you're just trying to give like general advice while at the same time, like you're using your own products to really try to like dial things in?
Yeah, you're totally right. We try not to push the product onto people, because we understand that nutrition is very individual. People have different preferences about what they want. When we do video calls with people and they say, I'm using another brand, that's absolutely fine. If they want to continue using that, we can obviously discuss alternatives and from our product line, of course. So that's absolutely fine as well. In terms of and what we're doing in the lab, just every time that anyone comes in and uses the lab when they're going through that heat acclimation protocol, is we'll be measuring sweat rate. So simply by looking at body weight before and after they've done their 1 hour ride or run in the heat, accounting for the fluid that they've consumed during that session. And then that will give us an idea of what their sweat rate is in liters per hour. So we can then use that to inform the hydration strategy that they might then employ in a race. So for example, as I've talked about Ant and Billy out in Kona at the moment, we've used that data and consolidated that data over several sessions to understand how the heat is going to impact their sweat rate, and therefore how much fluid and electrolytes they're going to need to replace, ideally while they're on the bike, and then as best as possible on the run. Of course, different dynamics in triathlon slightly to Swimrun, of course. I guess you guys have both been through the sweat testing protocol yourselves before, yep. So you understand that we obviously want to try and measure people's sweat sodium concentration. So we will do that right at the start of that process as well, to understand not only how much fluid, but of course how much sodium we need to replace when people are in the heat, but of course, when they're just doing their day-to-day training as well, we can inform that.
Well, let me ask you a question about that, because I think the one product that Chipper and I haven't tried is the Flow Gel. We sort of live on the 90, Chipper lives on the 90 gram gels. I mostly do the 30s, and obviously using the hydration products. But I'm curious, like how would you incorporate the Flow Gel in terms of, I mean, obviously we'll get specifically into Swimrun in a bit, but just like in general, because it's like a little bit of a different product, a little bit of different consistency. How are you seeing people incorporate that into their sort of fueling strategy?
Yeah, it's interesting. So most of the people that are using it are doing I would say broadly speaking, are doing longer distance racing. And if from a triathlon perspective, and I can speak from my own experience here, I suppose, simply having that available on the bike is a very efficient way of carrying a lot of calories. So you'll know we sell it in sort of 300-gram carb packets, and you just empty that into a bottle. I actually practiced with it this morning myself when I was doing my brick session. So a couple of hours on the bike. So nice. I managed to, and I think the benefit of having the flow gel is actually allows you to take on more carbohydrate than you probably think you could through more solid options. So for example, I previously used chews a lot, particularly while I was on the bike, but I found it quite difficult to go beyond sort of 90 grams an hour. Whereas we know now that you can push that envelope a little bit higher. And we're seeing that with our athletes. A lot of them are going, beyond 100 grams of carbs an hour. And I think the flow gel sort of facilitates that. It's a little bit easier to get down. It's a very efficient way of carrying it, particularly for triathlon. Interesting, we also see a lot of ultra runners using this. So people who are going to UTMB, or literally my first day at Precision was the Western States 100, which is
happy first day at work.
Yeah, so yeah, that's why I've still got a smile on my face. But yeah, and the thing that was so surprising to me there again was that I would assume that people would have some solid carbohydrate during, an event that's sort of 10, 12 hours long, even longer, 15 hours, something like that. But actually, with a lot of the guys we work with are using almost exclusively like a flow gel throughout that period of time. Of course, we've got crude aid stations and things like that where we can, pass them bottles and flasks that already have that flow gel in them. So it's easy to sort of logistically replace that and continue on that process through the race. But I think it's testament to the product. And I'm not trying to sell the product here, but it's a testament to the product that people are able to, essentially use that over such a long period of time. And it goes back to that efficiency of the calories that you're able to carry in quite an efficient way, I think.
Yeah, I've definitely been paying attention to the trail running aspect. And I was also surprised to see that sort of strategy was working for folks of a very more liquid or, not solid strategy, kind of not solid food strategy going forward, especially for like 100-mile race or 100Ks or whatever it is. But yeah, that's pretty cool that you've unlocked that for them. Sort of going back, and Chris and I, we've been lucky enough to be working with you all for 3 years at this point, and it's definitely changed the game as we've leveled up our fueling strategy and understanding how things work for us and gut training and stuff. For people who are kind of struggling where do I get started? We mentioned the sweat test. I think obviously that's like the most idyllic. If you can go in and get a sweat test and get very specific about, that will sort of put you on, are you a 1,000 person? Are you a 1,500? How would you kind of advise people that don't have access to the sweat test to kind of, our stage one advice, know your numbers, find out what your numbers are? How would you go about finding out what your numbers are? Where do I start? Should I be a 30, or how do you advise that?
Yeah, so if you could actually go onto our website, and we have a fuel and hydration planner. So you can put your events that you're doing in, and Swimrun is included in that as well as an event type, and talk about, are you going to race that hard? Are you just looking to get through it? You can estimate how much salt you think you lose. So do you see a lot of white marks on your clothing is a great example of whether you think you're a salty sweater. And you can add all that information, that subjective information, into the planner, and then it'll throw out the numbers that we've kind of devised, I suppose, and are based on the recommendations that are out there that in the literature from a research perspective, but also informed a little bit by what we see people doing as well. So we're regularly updating that algorithm based on what we see athletes actually doing, not just at the professional level, but across all levels as well. And I suppose that's probably one of my tasks that I've been brought in to do as well as part of my role at Precision. So that's kind of the start point. Once you've got that information, I think the challenge is to then go and try that on the first opportunity. So the planner might advise 60 grams of carbs an hour, and okay, that's a start point. But if you're racing for a long period of time, over sort of 3-4 hours, then that might need to be a little bit higher. For example, we might want to push the envelope and go more towards 75 or 90. And then the question comes, how do I actually get to that point? The obvious one is you need to train your gut, and everyone's heard of that phrase, I assume, of training your gut and how you go about that. So picking your key sessions through the week to start to build your tolerance to a slightly greater amount of carbohydrate. And you kind of need to titrate that up as well over time. So it can't be that you go, well, I did 60 this week, I'll try and do 90 next week. You've got to build that tolerance over time. But then if you're still struggling, some people will maybe struggle with that build up. They might need some advice on, okay, I may be trying to get all my calories from chews. Maybe I need to, is there some alternatives? What could I, maybe should I incorporate the flow gel, for example? And then on our website, we also have the opportunity to speak to one of basically the sports science team as well. So myself or one of the other members of the team you can jump on a call with us for free, no cost, and then we can talk you through that plan. And I think that's one of the great things actually for me about working at Precision is that we're able to interact with people on that basis and then see hopefully that we've helped them. And that's the main thing really. We want to try and help. And again, it won't be on that call, you must use Precision products. It's like, okay, what have you been using, and let's work this out moving forward. So yeah, that's my overall advice, I think.
So can I ask you a question about sort of the state of fueling? It feels like forever it was just like, oh, low carb, like be fat adapted and all this. Are we finally done with that? Is it because it seemed like, hey, whoever can take the fewest amount of carbs wins, but now we're past that now to just be like, hey, so who can consume the most is the winner kind of thing.
Carbohydrate products, your gels, you choose, your carb mixed drinks. When we look across, we've built up a database now of about 650 case studies, I think, different athletes doing various different endurance events. And I would say and to kind of concur with your point, that the general trend is that is going up. So certainly we're seeing more and more people, even guys doing ultra endurance events. Cycling's probably the one where it's been like that for a while, where they're comfortably getting towards 120 plus an hour of carbs. But we're starting to see that people in the ultra worlds, if I go back to those guys, 10, 11, 12 hours, they're still going at over 100 grams an hour now. So I think it really is developing into carbs are kind of king, and it's building up that tolerance and capacity to actually take them in. We know theoretically there's a bit of a ceiling in terms of how much you can absorb, and it's worth probably going back to that point as well, because the recommendations are 90 grams an hour from a scientific perspective, and we concur with that. But it's also worth remembering that the research that was done about 20 years ago that sort of started us off on that journey towards 90 grams an hour, in those first studies they actually fed a lot more carbohydrate than that. They fed sort of in the region of 100 to 110 grams an hour, and showed that you could oxidize or burn like 1.5 grams per minute, which gives you 90 grams over an hour if you have a mixture of glucose or maltodextrin and fructose in that drink or product, whatever it is. So despite these recommendations being like 90 grams an hour for so long, when you look at the research, it actually shows that if you're getting somewhere between 100 and we now think 120, then that's where you're kind of maximizing your body's ability to absorb that carbohydrate and use it at a rate of 90 grams an hour. And we even now know, even in the last sort of few months, there's a bit of research that's come out that shows that if I take 90 an hour, I might burn 70 of that, but someone else takes 90 an hour, they might burn 85 of that. So there's even variation, in our own ability on an individual level to basically, or there's a difference between what you take in and what you can actually burn and use to generate energy. So there's some inefficiency in that, and that inefficiency will vary from individual to individual. So it's certainly not a simple solution, or there's not a simple way to, how can I say this, get to it, understand that knowledge. You obviously need to go into a lab and start doing the testing with stable isotope tracers and things like that, which is very expensive to understand that on an individual level. But the way around it, I suppose, is to push that envelope and go back, okay, so if I can tolerate 100, then why would I not take in 100? Because that's maximizing theoretically at least, the opportunity to use most of that to generate energy. Yeah.
Right.
Nice. I take that as yes, Chris. We've moved beyond it.
No, yeah, because it's true. I remember like even, I don't know, 10 years ago doing a half marathon and maybe taking a gel. And now that just seems like just so dumb. You know,
So like
maybe it was
death
successful
march.
and everything, but like you're just crushed afterwards. And I think, that part of it has really been eye-opening. And that's certainly, the many times that Andy and, and folks from PFH have blown our minds has been this is for like, it isn't about fueling for the training necessarily or for gut training, but for the recovery immediately afterwards. So you can recover quicker so that you can get back to training, which I think is interesting. Another question I have for you is sort of around where caffeine comes in. I've been working with Andy kind of on this, sort of taking me on as a charity case to kind of work on, because I'm very low tolerance for caffeine, which I kind of think is a secret weapon because I don't need a lot for it to have like a sort of an outsized effect, but using it and deploying it successfully. And I feel like this year I finally really unlocked like how to use caffeine. How do you think about caffeine and how to use that optimally for performance enhancement?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. So it's very dependent on
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's great. So it's very dependent on how long the event is that you're going to be doing, of course. So there's some basics, I suppose, really. Caffeine takes about 15-20 minutes to get into the system to be absorbed. And it's probably going to be sort of peaking after about 45 to 60 minutes, roughly, after you've taken some caffeine. And then it should stay in the system for most people for about 4 to 5 hours. So that gives you an indication of, okay, if my event is, I don't know, 3 to 4 hours long, something like that, then I can probably get away with having some before. You do see some people then say, actually, maybe I'll take some in that last sort of 90, 60 minutes because they give it, or they feel that it gives them a bit of a boost. Whether it does or not is probably debatable, but that's fine. We like a placebo effect as well. And that's great. And then, of course,
feels like it's working.
Yeah. And normally the sort of range that we aim at there is somewhere between 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilo of body weight. Over that, and that goes up from just before over the period of the race. There's not really any, at least from a research perspective, any benefit of going beyond 6 milligrams per kilo. And in reality, you're increasing your risk of some of the side effects. And the most often would be like some nausea or some GI issues, basically, when you go beyond that. But of course, it's very individual. Everyone has very individual tolerances, as like you alluded to for yourself. So if we then extend out the race, that's when it starts to, and these guidelines start to fall apart a little bit, and it becomes a lot more that you've kind of got to work out what works best for you. Certainly as we start to go over 6 hours, mainly because the research, no one wants to be in a lab doing work, on a bike for more than 6 hours. So we don't do those studies naturally. So we just have to look anecdotally at what people do. And under those scenarios, we might have people who drip feed caffeine through that period. So again, they might start having some before, sort of 60 minutes beforehand. The event starts. That might, they might then top it up after 3 or 4 hours. And again, a couple, 2-3 hours later, something like that. So little and often, certainly drip feeding through that race. When it starts to go really long, and we're starting to get into the ultra territory here beyond 10 hours, that's when people might start to think, well, actually, I'll just save the caffeine for later on in the race. And that's typically what we might see people doing. Again, it's anecdotal, this, rather than specific guidelines, because the research just hasn't really been done. So they'll save their caffeine for maybe the second half of the race, where they think again, it goes back to that, maybe some placebo effect, or maybe it is some physiological benefit to get that boost that everyone kind of talks about later on in the race. So there's a few different ways you can kind of play with caffeine there. I suppose I'm sort of lucky. I'll happily drink coffee all day and I won't struggle to sleep. So I've got fairly high tolerance of caffeine. So then implementing that into my own race strategy is fairly simple. I can go quite high straight away, and I know it's not going to impact me. But again, it goes back to, plan or strategy and working out what works for you, rather than, as we all naturally do, we look at what our favorite athletes are doing and try to replicate that. That's definitely not the approach with caffeine.
No, that makes sense. And same with the fueling strategy. just because Chris can take 90 grams of carbs an hour, maybe I can't, or I haven't trained up to do that. So it's so individual. Sort of shifting a little bit to swim run specific stuff, obviously, because you're alternating between running and swimming, you don't have kind of the convenience that, triathlon has about, oh man, on the bike, you can really have it loaded up with your favorite solution, whether that be a drink mix. And you have to kind of really decouple these different levers, one being carbs, and then the hydration piece is a little bit tougher, and then the electrolyte piece. But luckily, Precision Fuel and Hydration kind of gives you pretty good handles on those levers to do that. How do you kind of recommend thinking about each sort of part about that? So let's just say for sake of argument, the 3 to 4 hour type of swim run event where, you're doing maybe 6 to 8 runs and swims there, you're targeting your 60 to 90 grams of carbs. How do you think about how much liquid to get and then kind of sodium, and where to get that when you don't really have like, a running vest where you have multiple bottles that you can fill up at aid stations and stuff? It's a little bit more of a minimal setup, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess and you're completely right to start with in terms of decoupling the fluid and the fuel, or at least let's call hydration fluid and sodium, to make sure that we're talking about both there, but also the fuel. So decoupling those two things. So let's think about carrying fuel, and naturally we can start to think about things that are fairly lightweight gels. This is where I would suggest that the flow gel probably is an option for people to start to think about. So for us, we sell them in big packs, but you can decant that either into a bottle, or we've got soft flasks as well. So you could also just have 300 grams of carbs in a soft flask essentially, and put that down your wetsuit in the little pockets as is needed. I think using from a hydration perspective, I think using some of those soft flasks, and I'll be honest, I heard this from Andy in another podcast about decanting the sodium into the soft flask, not filling it with water until you get to an aid station, and so obviously you can roll it up quite neatly.
Oh yeah, we're big fans of that approach.
We've taken that approach as well.
So, and I think that's probably the sensible approach in terms of decoupling. Obviously, you need to understand or have some idea of what your sweat rate is going to be to know how much fluid ideally you want to try and replace. And of course, it's worth saying you don't need to replace everything that you lose. There is some level of discrepancy there between how much you lose and how much you need to replace before performance starts to sort of tail off. And broadly speaking, we roughly, would say that that's about 2% of your body weight before performance starts to decrease. Again, it's very individual. People can tolerate much greater levels of dehydration and still perform well, and there's plenty of evidence for that as well. But roughly speaking, that's what we would aim at. So I think understanding your sweat rate, and I assume that is going to vary greatly depending on, we've taken that 3 to 4 hour swim run as an example, but I guess even within that, there might be some temperature swings. You're going from potentially cooler water conditions, and then you're out maybe into the heat. You've got a bit of your swim run suit on. You're going to be sweating a little bit more. So I think understanding if you can at least, understanding your sweat rate in both of those conditions. And also it's worth saying, understanding that you will sweat when you're swimming. That's something that not everyone appreciates, how much you do sweat when you swim. So you definitely need to account for that. It's not just that, I only sweat when I'm running. There's definitely an aspect of that while you're swimming as well. And then that you can use that information to inform what your strategy is going to be. So how many of those soft flasks might I need to carry, or how many times at an aid station, or how much fluid do I need to take on at an aid station in my soft cup that I'm carrying as well. And using the soft flasks to some extent pre-filled with the electrolytes is a sensible approach. I think carrying some extra salt capsules, particularly if it's a warm day, you might need to respond to a change in temperature which is much greater than you anticipated, and you might be sweating more, so therefore you need to replace more of your sodium as well as fluid as well. So the salt capsules that we sell and other people sell are a good option to just stuff down your suit as well, I think.
Well, I think that advice is super well taken. I think one way we think about it when people ask us these questions, and we tell them to go to you guys, but if they still want an answer from us, we usually say something to the effect of, fuel, 60 to 90 grams, and you can do that. Obviously, you can't fuel in the middle of the swim, so you got to be a little bit creative about taking a gel before a swim or immediately after to kind of stay within your window of, a gel every 20 minutes or so. And on the hydration side is like, you don't know what conditions are going to be. And if you're not real sweat tested or really just comfortable with your own sort of body and how it works, is just kind of being opportunistic on the hydration, like never skipping an aid station, being sort of just trying to stay on top of it, whether you think you need it or not. Would that be like sort of a general recommendation that you'd give as well?
I think so. And there's a lot of, and irrespective of the sport here, you've got to understand your body and listen out for those cues as well. So as much as we say, you need to maybe take on some sodium, if you are, if you have like a cotton mouth, we might call it, where you're just craving plain water, then listen to your body. And, at the next aid station, just take on some plain water to see if you can, correct some of that maybe imbalance that you've created if you've taken on a little bit too much sodium earlier in the race, for example. So you've got to be aware of your body and listen to the cues. Yes, we can have a pre-planned strategy for these things, but you've certainly also got to listen to the cues that your body's thrown at you. Our body's very good at telling us what we need, so we should use that information for as much as we can. I think, and again, this goes back to something that I read from Andy when he completed, I think, the Attillo a few years ago now, that he said one of the aid stations that he was just trying to almost take on as much as he could, because he thought, well, there's no harm in overfueling here. There's certainly going to be harm in underfueling. And I think to some extent, that's probably true for hydration as well, particularly if you're, again, listening to your body and you know what you're crying out for, taking on a little bit more fluid, maybe, and sodium if needed, and having a period where you maybe run a little bit slower before you get to the next swim, just to let that sit and work itself out. And then you can then push on, because you're well hydrated or you've fueled well. So there's got to be an element of patience, I think, with that, and listening to your body. And yes, you can have a pre-planned strategy, but also adapting that and being flexible with that is really key. And that, of course, that comes with experience as well of doing these events. So the more you do, the more you understand what your body's sort of going to need and how you're going to feel at certain points through a race as well.
That's such solid advice. And I think Chris and I, as we've done more and more swim runs, I think one thing this season and a little bit last season of what we've taken the rolled up flask as a note is just having that soft flask to be able to fill up, to have water, because with the swim run, sometimes you just one run might be 5Ks, the next one could be 500 meters. There's a lot of variance, so just having some water on you, so when you're getting those cues from your body or some fluids, that you can take it when you kind of need it, as opposed to, oh man, the next aid station's not for 10Ks and I'm out of water, like I'm really going to be suffering on this run leg. I hope my partner brought some that I can bum off of them. I've done that to Chris before several times, but like having that ability just so that you have something on board. So we've been carrying the soft flasks almost for every race, regardless of the distance. If it's going to be between over 2 hours, pretty much, we've started to just always bring a soft flask, either pre-filled or pre-filled with like a 1500, just the dry powder, and roll it up and it tucks away nice in the suit there.
And just to add to that,
effective.
Just to add to that, Chipper, just the idea of trying to be really tactical, which is like, okay, we know there's a really long run halfway through the race, so let's time filling up the soft flask with a strong sodium solution, just to make sure we're topped off during this leg, which is a nice chance to kind of like level set, or make sure we reset our levels. And maybe we drink the whole thing, maybe we don't, but just trying to be really strategic about, okay, like, we know we need electrolytes, we know we need all this stuff. So where's an opportune time to take it, which, is different than triathlon, where it's, you have an aid station on the run every couple of miles, on the bike, maybe every 10K or something. So, in swim run, it's just not like that. You kind of have to be opportunistic. And certainly, I think one thing that we found, Sam, is, I think the way Chipper and I called it, is kind of feeling like gelled out, where, we've done the World Championship a couple times. And, the first year, I think we went 6-7 hours before we were just like done with gels and just really felt like we couldn't take anymore. The second year, I think we went like 8 hours before we were gelled out. And we talked to Andy about this, and he was like, well, you just kind of have to man up and just like take it down.
He said we were sauced basically.
but I'm wondering like, you know, in terms of gut training, especially for long events, and, you know, whether it's an ultra or, you know, the world championship or something like that, like how do you extend your ability to take gels or take in, you know, nutrition for such a long time? Is it as simple as, yeah, I just got to keep practicing and kind of like, you know, man up and do it? Or is there something more to that?
Yeah, the first answer. No.
Noted.
We're soft.
Noted. So, yeah, once you've manned up, and yeah, then yeah, there's definitely an aspect of building that tolerance over time. So that's one of the things we spoke about right at the start, is building that tolerance over time. And when I work with athletes on an individual level, I'll often tell them, and these are amateur athletes most of the time, is that I'll tell them that's going to take, you know, probably somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks to really build some tolerance. It's not that every session you're trying to smash as many gels down as possible to build that. It's on specific sessions that are of, you know, of a relevant duration and or intensity, to understand how your body reacts under those circumstances, and at least then you can adapt and understand how you're going to feel in a race a little bit there. The other thing that I'll often tell people, and again it comes from my triathlon background, is that you never, sort of an age group level, you will never be training the duration that you're going to race for. So you're never going to ride 112 miles on the bike and then go and do a marathon just to test your nutrition. So yeah, quite often the second half of a marathon from a triathlon perspective is you're going into a bit of the unknown, to be honest, and you don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know whether that resonates with you guys or not from a swim run perspective, but what I will often tell people is we need to find out what's on the aid stations in these events that you're going to be doing, and practice with that and those sort of options whilst we're training, particularly on the bigger days that we might do. Yes, we might follow our pre-planned fueling strategy for a little while, but quite often a good example from triathlon is that we might tell people to, like, okay, make sure that you can tolerate some Coca-Cola as an option. Is that a go-to option? Maybe, you know, you might need to go to Coke and bananas. Again, you need to ensure that you are going to be able to tolerate that come race day as well. And that is all incorporated for me into that gut training process over a number of weeks leading into key events, that you've got to recognize that there may well come a time where you've had enough gels, chews, sweet stuff, and you need an alternative option. And part of it, I think, is building, the tolerance to that. But I think also part of it is building the confidence that I can go, actually, I'm not feeling gels anymore. What am I going to switch to? This is what's available. And I know that I should be able to tolerate this. And so you don't think too long about, I don't know what to try. Actually, let's just go for it. I know I can tolerate it. Yeah. Let's get it down, see how it sits, and then we move forward. And it might be that, you know, you come round and you're able to switch back to your preferred choice, and maybe that's gels, or you just continue with the, you know, bananas and Coke or whatever it is, and that's fine as well. But it's having a backup option, your plan B, if you like, and maybe even a plan C, to be able to fall back onto from a fueling perspective, because ultimately getting enough calories, getting enough carbs into the system is going to determine, you know, how you perform in the later part of that race. So you've got to find a way, or an alternative way, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So Sam, you mentioned something there implicitly, but I want to make it explicit. It's when you're gelled out, you don't stop fueling.
Yeah.
You find alternative fueling. Like, do not stop, right? Because I think I've certainly made that mistake. It's like, I just can't do anymore. I'll just like wing it for this last hour and a half I think I have for this event. But I think it's makes so much sense. I just wanted to call that out, because I think like the temptation is just to be like, I'm just going to take a break. And what you really need to do is you need to try to find an alternative at the aid station. I think the point's super well taken, just like knowing what's on the course, knowing what's going to be available, knowing what options. Like for the World Championship, it's like, okay, there's going to be salty chocolate balls at this random aid station, or there's going to be, you know, cinnamon buns or something, like anything that might be helpful. I mean, I did an ultra years ago, and the thing that saved me once I was gelled out was there was Pringles at the aid station, and to this day, I just have, every time I see a Pringle, I just like say a prayer of thanks that these things existed and I was able to tolerate it for the next 3 hours that I had in this ultra. Now, going back to if someone's, okay, so I think anyone who's listening to this is like, gut training, check. I need to do it. It's super important. How would you advise people to start gut training? You mentioned you don't want to do it every workout. Is it as straightforward as like, hey, if you're going to do anything over 45 minutes, you should try to at least take a gel, or how do you think about helping people on the journey if they want to start gut training?
Yeah. So I would look at the training week, and for me, I might have like 2 or 3 key sessions, either that are going to be just below, at, or just above race intensity, and then probably some longer sessions that are going to, so are going to be long in duration. And those are the sessions that I would focus on for gut training. So again, if I speak from my own experience of triathlon, again, we can go back to the session I did this morning, which was very race specific. It was 2 hours on the bike with some race efforts in there, into a half an hour just brick run. So I feel very high on the bike with the flow gel, funnily enough, and managed to do about 115 grams an hour, I think, and then took 1 gel on the run. So I was just preparing myself for what I'm going to be doing in a race there. Now, tomorrow, I might just be running for 45 minutes easy. And so that's not really a relevant session to train the gut, because I'm not going to be racing at, or I'm not going to be running at the intensity I will be running at in a race, or the duration isn't particularly long for the stuff that I'm doing. So it's about being selective with those key sessions through the week. And for most people in endurance sport, you probably have like maybe somewhere between 2 and 4 key sessions where you can start to building some gut training into those. And the start point is, okay, you look at what you've been doing in previous races and go, right, that's the start point for what I'll try now. And then it becomes an iterative process through, a number of weeks, maybe sort of anywhere between 8, 10, 12 weeks leading into key racing, to start to build up that tolerance. And, some people might start at 60 grams an hour. Some people might start at 40 grams an hour, and they've obviously got a little more way to go. But it's not, you also have to accept that process is going to take time, and the end point isn't 90 grams or 100 grams an hour. The end point is whatever you get to by the time it comes around to your race, and accepting that might not be the recommendations, but you get to a point that you know that you can tolerate that amount of fuel per hour and go with that. And then, you race, you see how it goes, you reflect, and then you build again for your next event.
Yeah, I love that. I've certainly made the mistake, like fueling at some point has been like an afterthought, like, oh, the day before, like, oh, I'm racing for this hours, like, let me just throw some gels. And it really needs to be starting basically when you're starting your training plan for your event. Some of these are 8 to 12 week kind of training plans for your running, your swimming, like your physical activity. Just layer on your nutrition, gut training plan on top of that, and find kind of where it aligns along the way seems to be the sort of recommended strategy there.
Yeah. I think part of that as well is understanding that we've talked about an iterative process there, but you also have to understand that it's not also going to be linear going up. So, even through the week, I might have 60 grams an hour as a start point. The next session might be 70 grams. Oh, brilliant. I feel great. And then you come to maybe try 70 again on a bigger session at the weekend, and it doesn't feel quite so good. So maybe I need to knock that down again. The jumps, it's not just that linear process. A lot like training, it's progressive over time, and there's ups and downs, but ultimately the line trends up. And it's the same with the gut training process as well. And that's, part of that gut training process is understanding which products work for you. If I, again, talk about myself, like for years I used like chews as the main source of carbohydrate, and I'm now sort of switching over to gels just because I find them a little bit easier on my stomach for longer periods, particularly when I'm doing the full distance racing versus like a 70.3. So accepting that not only will the amount of carbohydrate that you can consume and tolerate will change over time, but also that the products that you will use may also evolve over time, and being open to that change is probably important as well.
I love it. Sam, I think every time we have someone from PFH, I think this is maybe the 4th or 5th episode where we've had, some expert, Andy or someone else on the show. It's always so eye-opening. And when we had Andy on, this is now like almost 4 years ago, I remember after that just being like, I've just been such an idiot. And then
Really?
on the nutrition side, it's like, oh my God. It's like, it was such a huge unlock for us. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for everything that you guys are doing in PFH. I think it's like, it's so helpful. And again, the fact that it isn't really dogmatic and you're not really like pushing product, I think it makes us for sure want to keep supporting you guys.
Yeah.
So I guess one final question for you is, are you going to be doing Hokey Cokey next year with the crew?
Yeah, join JP, tether up.
Yeah, it's not been talked about just yet, but we have got our end of year
It has
meeting
now.
So yeah, so you've planted the seed for sure. Never say never. I'm definitely open to these types of things. So yeah.
Sweet.
Love it. And I also put a request in. We can volunteer Andy for this, but obviously running in a wetsuit and then swimming, I would love to understand in your heat box that you have in your parking lot, like the effects of wearing a wetsuit and what the increased sort of sweat rate might be for that. So, if Andy wants to dive into the lab and find out for us, we would love to hear on the Low Tide Boyz.
This is the benefit of working at Precision, that we've got all these crazy people who are willing to do these types of things. So to be honest, that's just a regular week and there's enough people.
It's Tuesday.
Man's going to want to do that. So yeah, well, watch your space for that data.
Nice. I'll stay subscribed to the newsletter then, because I can't wait to see that one come through.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, that was Dr. Sam Shepard, head of sports science at PFH. Thank you so much for joining us, Sam. Enlightening, and have a great weekend. Appreciate you.
Thanks very much, guys.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a rating or review, since that's the best way to help other people discover the show and the sport of swim run.
Check out our website, lowtideboyz.com. That's boys with a Z, for swimrun resources, including gear guides, tips, how-to videos, and so much more. Make sure to check out our meme page at The Low Tide Boyz on Instagram. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, send us a DM or email us at lowtideboyz@gmail.com.
We'd like to thank Riding Easy Records for our show music, and of course our wives for their support and tolerance of our swim run and other activities.
Lots of activities.
Lots of activities.
Finally, you can support our efforts on Patreon. Until next time, get out there and go for a swim.
Then a run.
And then a swim.
Then another run.
Then another swim.
Then run some more.
Just keep going.
Let's go.
And then stop at some point because,
And fuel. Don't forget to fuel.
Gotta fuel.
Of course, yes.
In the morning,